This is Hari Sharma with Social Science Baha and Alliance for Social Dialogue. It's my pleasure on behalf of the Social Science Baha to facilitate this very important discussion. यहाँहरूलाई स्वागत छ र यो कार्यक्रमलाई संयोजन गर्न पाउँदा अथवा मोडरेट गर्न पाउँदा धेरै खुसी लागेको छ. Couple of ground rules. Please kindly switch off your mobile or put in silent mode. That would help us to smoothly run this program. And the work by Kåre Vollan is available at the bookstall out there. Anyone who is interested, please, you can buy the copy of that there. And we'll have a question and answer session after the presentation. Mr. Vollan will speak for half an hour, and then I'll ask the distinguished panels to respond or comment or share their ideas, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. We hope to run this program not more than 1.5 hours, at the most 1 hour 45 minutes. So these days, keeping people for more than 2 hours in a particular meeting has become very difficult. So we will stick by our timing. So I hope the audience will bear with us on that. So there will be 2 mics and the volunteers going around during the question and answer session. So without much delay, let me introduce today's main speaker, Kåre Vollan. I think many of us know him. He has been coming and going out of this country for the last 6-7 years. After the first Constituent Assembly, has advised our Election Commission. He has met with all political leaders and parties of all sets. Everybody knows him personally at the political leadership level, as far as I understand. He has advised or worked on, basically, more than 30 countries all over the world, especially on electoral issues, election issues. He is the main book that on Nepal, basically, elections in Nepal, identifying politically excluded group, which Social Science Bar is proud to publish, which analyzed the Parliamentary Constituent Assembly elections since 1991, looked at which of Nepal's 125 social groups require assistance through affirmative actions for their proportionate representation and which do not. So he will be based on those experience. He will dwell on the current draft that is being circulated. In order to take this discussion forward, we have panels. Honorable Minendra Rizal, Minister for Information and Communication. He has informed us that he'll be a little late. As I understand, there's a very important business in the Parliament going on, especially governments and policies and program is being debated, discussed, or hopefully adopted today with the motion thank motion today. So he would be here any moment, but he has informed us that he is a very important governmental responsibility. Similarly, Honorable Lakshman Lal Karna, who is a co-chair of Sadbhavana Party, will be here with us any moment. I think he's also been held up by the important business in the Parliament. We have Professor Krishna Khanal, whom you also know is a public intellectual, university professor in political science, has contributed widely and immensely in the contemporary debate of political transition, constitutional development, various issues. So he's with us. He's already with us. We have Mukta Singh Lama Tamang next to Krishna Khanal, who is with the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. Dr. Tamang worked recently as a director of Social Inclusion Atlas and Ethnographic Profile Research, which was completed in 2014, associated with the Department of Anthropology. And next to Muktaji is Honorable Khemlal Dekota, who comes from UCP and Maoist, the member of the very important political party, who has also been contributing personally and politically in various debates that we see in this country. So welcome, Mr. Vollan. Welcome to the panel. Now I give floor to Mr. Kåre Vollan for his presentation.
Yeah, that was a little bit too much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma. Thank you to Social Science Baha for inviting me for this session, and namaskar, everybody. It's very nice to see you all. Many of you I know, and some I don't know, but it's. I hope that we will have a very good discussion the next hour and a half. I'll just see that this, yeah. Sorry. I'm going to speak about representation issues, but since we are restricted on times, I will really concentrate on House of Representatives, the lower house of the Parliament. There are many issues also related to upper house, to the federal assemblies and so on. We can do that in the debate, but I'm going to talk about more or less the inclusiveness issues related to the representation in House of Representatives. And there are two main issues which I'd like to discuss. And one is the complexity of what has been proposed in the draft constitution, which came out on the 30th of June. And the other one is, how will it work in terms of inclusiveness, and would there be some alternative ways of doing it? So I'd like to take a step back, because that is the analysis which came out of the work with this booklet, which you can also find downstairs at the end of the table. The Constituent Assembly elections in 2008 and 2013 produced a certain result. And as you know, in those elections there were 42% first past the post and 58% list PR. And there was an article in the interim constitution which then defined the inclusiveness, the diversity of the representation in these Constituent Assembly. And it was related to the PR election. So those 58%, while the parties proposed lists for those seats, they had to take into account women, Dalits, Madhesis, Janjatis, backward regions, and what was called others, but which was basically Bahuns and Chetris. So all the groups of the country had to be proportionally represented in that election. That was the rule. And that led us to think in terms of alternatives for two reasons. And one reason, well, first of all, I should say those groups were then quantified by using the 2001 census. That was not an easy job. And in the end, it was the parliamentarian Minendra Rijal, who is coming here in shortly, who actually did that and put that into the to the election law in the end. So these were the figures that had to be fulfilled. And it was really complicated. It looks so innocent. Okay. This sentence looks so innocent and it looks so democratic. You really need to have everybody included. But what it doesn't say is that, first of all, it is related only to the PR side. And we knew even before the 2008 election that in particularly Hill caste people would be overrepresented in the first past the post. So they would get it two ways. They would be overrepresented in first past the post, and then they would get their proportional share of list PR as well. And the second is, as I said, the complexity in actually implementing this. I'm not used to this, but I'll try. And this is not for you to understand that table. This is for you to understand how complex it became. Because in order to actually check and implement that sentence and that table, the Election Commission had to make very detailed rules for legal lists. And as you know, there was also a selection after the election where they also had to meet the same criteria. And this is really where you can see Madhesi, Dalit, Janjati, backward region and caste, and then women. And it was actually women and men had to be balanced within each of these groups as well. So these are really, if you got 10 people elected, between 3 and 4 had to be Madhesis, between 1 and 2 had to be Dalits, and so on. There was not much flexibility for the parties in their, what they called selection. Just keep this a little bit in mind before we go to the more current draft. So the first thing is the complexity. The second observation is that since all groups had a quota, they were specified, every candidate running for elections in PR had to declare identity. If you were, let's say you really insist, I am not going to declare my group identity. I don't want to say whether I am a Bahun, a Dalit, a Gurung, or a Yadav. It's irrelevant because I feel my identity is a Nepali. Okay, you can say that, but you cannot run for elections if you say that. You can run in first past the post, but not in PR. And this is actually, if it had been tested against in the Committee for Human Rights in the UN, I'm sure they would not have liked that you have to declare an identity to run for elections in a certain race, in 58% of the seats. And the political elite got it two ways, which I already said. Women and Dalit did get promoted with this, absolutely, there is no doubt. Women did get 50% out of the 58, plus a little bit more. Dalits did get more than they would have done, but it also put a ceiling, since there were also quotas for the elite, and men, then it became a ceiling also on the representation for men, women and Dalits. So you had to have, every party had to have 13% Dalits, but it was illegal to have 20%, even though everybody would know that Dalits would struggle to win seats in first past the post. So these are some observations of that system, and which led us to thinking, could this be simplified and could it be more targeted? Those two things. Could the quotas be changed in such a way that those who actually need it, women plus some other groups, would be promoted? And here is just an illustration. If we Hill caste, we know always win seats in first past the post, regardless whether there is a quota or not. And we know that Dalits do not win seats. Last time they won 2 out of 240. Muslims also win fewer seats than their fair share. But for Janjatis, the picture is much more complicated. Some Janjati groups would actually always win seats, others would never. And the same with Madhesi caste. And I'll come back to who are who, who are those who are above the line and who is below the line. And this is actually the research we did, where we went through all election results since 1991. But in the CA elections, we only looked into first past the post. Because in the PR, as you know, there were quotas, so it's meaningless to check what came out of that. Not meaningless, but not so interesting. So we looked into who will win, who has, is there a systematic exclusion? And not surprisingly, the answer is yes. Hill Dalits, there was one famous Dalit in 1991. After that, never, until 2008. 2008 has actually a more inclusive result than before and also after. Basically due to the Maoists who at that time actually did have inclusive candidates even in first past the post. But we can see here, for example, those who get 0.5 or less represent 8.6% of the population. And then we have some hill and mountain Janjatis, many mountain groups and also many small hill groups, adding up to 16% of the population, and they are also always underrepresented. Madhesi caste, same thing, these are more than 20 groups, small caste groups, most of them, and they are not even close to their representation. Same thing, Madhesi Dalits, even Terai Janjatis would also have the same profile. And these add up to 45% of the population. But so they represent almost half the population, but they have very much fewer. Let me now take a peek here so that it doesn't. So they add up to 45% of the population, but they win from 8.8% up to 13%. In 2008, they won 22%. But apart from that, it's really between 8 and 10, 12%. So, as I said, they are obviously, consistently excluded. And there is some, and we can see that in this booklet, there is some sensitivity study on it. Is it really very dependent on the definition? And it really isn't. There is a clear divide between those included and those excluded. And obviously then we have the opposite, the included groups, hill caste, Bahuns and Chetris mainly. They are 31% of the population, and they win from 54 to 62% of the seats, consistently. And then you have hill mountain Janjatis. They are the Newars, Gurungs, Rai, Takali, and one more, Madhesi caste, Brahmins, Banya, Yadav, and so on. They do get, it doesn't mean that they are always, for example, Yadav are always saying, oh, we are excluded. When it comes to elections to parliament, they have not been excluded since 91. That doesn't mean that they have been given positions in government, in civil service, as ministers. But in parliament, they have been included. And even these are basically the Tarus. They dropped in 2008, but then they went up again. So in a way, it's not that consistent, but they are quite close to be represented properly. So let's come to this present day. The 16-point agreement, as you know, said that in the House of Representatives there need to be 60% first past the post and 40% list PR. So, and that is now written into the constitution. And then there is this sentence, which is a very similar sentence to the one I showed you already from the interim constitution, which I said this was really complicated to implement. So some of us had hoped that now it would be simplified. It didn't get simplified. It is actually 3 times more complicated than in 2007. In the sense that the list is now women, and then they have added Adibasi as a, oh, here's a mistake in the translation, I'm sorry about that. I didn't notice. But Adibasi as a separate group, Janjati is not a separate group, sorry, but Adibasi Janjati is. They have added Taru, and they have added Muslims, and they have added minority communities, or marginalized, I think the correct would be marginalized communities. So these goes from 6 groups to 10 groups. 10 groups. They overlap drastically, and some are saying they are going to take away some of them. But even if they take away 2 of them, it will still be 8 groups. But then it also says, on the basis of geography, population, and provincial balance. And this is a matter of interpretation. What does it mean? If it should mean anything, it must be that on the list, parties need to make sure that they also have a balanced representation from the different provinces. If that is, and balanced representation, does it mean proportional to the population, or is it something else? If it is to be implemented, it needs to be clearly defined. So let's say that it is still meant in proportion to population. That means you have 10 groups, including women, plus 8 provinces, which add up to 18 groups, identities, that then need to be represented on the list. And going back to what I showed you earlier, with the rules for implementation, I can say, theoretically we can make the rules. In practice, I'm absolutely sure parties will not be able to suggest legal lists. They were protesting badly before, when there were 6 groups. With 18 groups, it's literally impossible. That is my humble kind of statement, which is kind of rigid, but I'm pretty sure about that. As I said, we can make the rules, but parties will not be able to find the combination of being Dalit woman from some province in addition to everything else. So that is the complexity part of it. But more importantly is the principle. The PR side is now being reduced from 58 to 40%. That means that I'm sorry. Let me. And the proportional side is down. Also is down from 40. Is up from 42 to 62. 60%. I'm sorry. Hill caste groups would normally win from 54 to 62% in the first past the post. That is what I showed you in all elections from 91 onwards. This is a clear tendency. That means that out of the 60% first past the post, if this tendency is kept, and I don't think it will be drastically changed, the Hill caste will win between 32% and 37% of the full house, even if they don't win a single seat in PR, okay? And still they are given 31% of the PR. So they will get this automatically. And then they will, in addition, get 31% out of the PR side of the elections. And for the Dalits, it's exactly opposite. They would win 13% out of the 40%. And then with some flexibilities for the parties and rounding off and all that, they will have fewer than 5% in the parliament. There are remedies for this, and which I will come back to. Another issue here is actually Madhesi parties. Back in 2007, Madhesi parties got established, and they said, we want to have Madhesis on the list, so we do not want to follow the rules for quotas for everybody. And then after a lot of discussions and a lot of demonstrations and violence, there was an agreement that actually small parties with short lists, if you have fewer than 100 candidates out of the 335 possible, you don't really need to meet the quota regulation. This was unconstitutional. There was no exception in the constitution, but it was accepted by everybody, and nobody made any complaint to the Supreme Court about that. But for the permanent constitution, one cannot rely on a similar rule. So one should just be aware that Madhesi parties, according to this rule, will have to have 31% hill caste people on the list. Some of them don't mind that. Some of them actually did it last time, but some don't want it. And 50% have to come from other provinces than the two in Terai. So the question is it really needed to specify that the elite, which would be hill caste and some Janjatis and some Madhesis. The Janjatis would be, as I said, Gurung, Newar, Limbu, Rai, Dakalis, who are always well represented in every election. There hasn't been a need for special measures. Is it then needed? And in electoral systems, generally, in Nepal, a proportional election seems very often to be said to be an inclusive election. It is representation of groups. But remember, proportional election is, first of all, distribution of seats to parties according to the votes given to the parties on election day. This is what proportional elections are, nothing else. And in most countries, that's it. So it's up to the parties to actually suggest candidates. If they want to have only the elite in the list, the voters would punish them normally. Those who belong to the majority wouldn't care to vote for them. And that is the mechanism that is normally used. Then to correct structural inequalities, many countries would have quotas or special representation for women. They would say on the list, you cannot just put all the men on top of the list and all the women on the bottom. You need to have women on electable places on the list, and that is by law. So that is in many countries done. Very few are going beyond that, but there are some, but very few. In Nepal, it is kind of a tendency to say every group needs to be identified by law, even though we know that the parties will nominate in a quite biased manner. So in most countries, you would at least only have some special representation for those who need it. Those who actually need to be assisted to achieve certain equality. And then when that equality has been reached, you would then take away the special measures. So if that is kind of the purpose of naming or identifying groups, one could make it much simpler. One could say, instead of saying that all these groups need to be represented on the list, even if they don't need it, you could say such groups that would otherwise be underrepresented or otherwise excluded from political life should be given special representation. And this could be specified in the law. So this is, if one go with the figures I have presented in this booklet, it would mean 45% or something between 42 and 45, but there could be other criteria. That is just an example of what could be done. But one could say, okay, these groups, they are excluded and they should be given at least a certain representation. It is still legal to give them more, but it would be illegal to give them fewer. So that is a possibility. And here are two ways of formulating it. One could be that the election law should define special representation for such groups, including women and Dalits, which are otherwise excluded. Some people are saying, no, you need to name more groups. So if we need to name more groups, then you could say including women, Dalits, Muslims, excluded Janjatis, and excluded Madhesi caste. And then the details of that have to come in the election law. And that could be dynamic. It didn't have to be there forever. It could be, here is an example of a list that could be kept in the election law. There are 15, and these refer to the census groups, and there are 15 Dalit groups in the census, Muslim and Sikhs, and then excluded Janjatis would be 41, and excluded Madhesi caste 28. So this is altogether 70, 85 groups. This is one attempt, one example of how it could be done. Then every 10 years, one could look into, are they still excluded? Are there some groups we should take out? India has something similar, but they always put people in and not out. But here it could be, now actually this group has Margas and Tamangs. They are now doing so well in the first past the post elections. We can take them out of this list, for example. So this could be dynamic. The closed lists, the draft is actually using the term closed list. Closed list in most of the world means that the party will suggest a list. If the party wins 10 seats, those 10 seats will be filled from the top of the list, the top 10 on the list. And that is what I call ranked list or prioritized list. Unfortunately, in the election law, not in the constitution, but in the current election law, they use the closed list about a totally open list, which is open to the parties, but not to the voters. So that is why we had this selection process after the elections in 2008 and 13. And in 13, it created a lot of conflicts in parties. I do believe, when I've talked to politicians and drafters, it seems like they actually, when they say closed list, they mean closed list. They actually mean prioritized list. And they are meant to be filled from top of the list. So that is actually, to my mind, a very good development, because it gives more transparency. The voters know who they vote for. In previous 2 elections, voters had no idea who if this party wins 20% of the votes, we don't know who will fill those seats. And there were some surprises. People thought something, and the party leaders did something else. So with the ranked lists, it's also easier for groups to see, I'm a Yadav, and this party has actually a Yadav on number 5, and a person I really like, another one on number 15, and they are likely to win. So I will give my vote for that party. I hope that it's not only this that will decide what party they vote for, but that could be one of the issues. So with closed lists, the incentive for being diverse is much larger. Last time they could be very diverse in terms of geography, for example, in the list, but when it came to the selection, they selected from the neighborhood of the party leaders or whatever they did. But they didn't try to be that inclusive. They can't get away with it with closed list. So therefore, mandatory rules, for example, for province representation, is not so needed. And I think if they want to go for province representation, they should rather have province list than national list, which is an alternative way of doing it. I point wrongly. So a closed list could look like this. It is prioritized, in this case 16 candidates, and in order to have 50% women and on electable places, not just at the end, if it is balanced representation, it probably needs to be balanced in such a way that they can also be elected, because that is the purpose. So at least number 2, 4, 6, and so on need to be women. But they can be number 1, 3, 5, and so on as well. And if you then have defined excluded groups, adding up to 45 or 42%, you could do something similar. And here you will see that if you combine, if Durga is also a Dalit, she is kind of filling 2 quotas. And that opened up for a blank line here. Krishna could then be a Bahun, who is a party leader and could, could fill that seat. So whenever there is blank, it is up to the party to do whatever they want. So this gives flexibility. But think about it. This can be done with 18 groups. This is what we would have to do. If we go with a current language, we would have to expand that with 16 more columns and crosses. And that is what the parties then need to meet of requirements. And that is why I'm pretty confident when I say in practice they will not be able to do it. I think I'm supposed to point there. I'm going to stop there, and we can come back to other issues. As you saw, there's something on National Assembly, local elections, province elections, but I really wanted to talk about what is on the inclusiveness side, and which has to do also with the Social Science Baha publication and analysis of previous election. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vollan, for your interesting, precise presentation. Now I move to panel. I will go on this order, and then hopefully by the time the panelists who are present here finish their presentations or comment or statement, we'll have other Minendra and Lakshmanji joining us. So, Krishnaji, Professor Krishna Kanal, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Hariji. Kåre Vollan has done an excellent presentation, and because I am familiar with his works since last 5 years, and he has been closely watching Nepal's electoral representation particularly from the perspective of inclusion. From his book, as well as his presentation, it is clear that all the general elections of Nepal, starting from 1991 to 2013 CA elections, CA2 elections, it is done in a very scientific basis. His findings are the real situation of the country in terms of representation, what is lacking, who is included, who is excluded. So there is no disagreement on his findings, but the problem lies on how to address this. As we are aware that he has made an excellent recommendations, including lot of illustrations. The latest one, that how we can make the inclusive ZIP list. Sometimes it may be problematic for us because we have too many groups. For instance, he identified 42 Janajati groups as excluded, 28 Madhesi groups, caste groups as excluded. So how those groups could be included? Because many of these groups have population less than 5,000. In a parliamentary election, in a National Assembly election, it will be really challenging to accommodate, to get the smaller groups elected, particularly from the FPTP, with some exception. Otherwise, it is virtually impossible because the head count is always there in the FPTP electoral system. But from PR2, I think situation of Nepal is not so easy to accommodate, to make a very sound accommodation of the smaller groups. For that purpose, he developed a ZIP list, which we can follow if our decision makers are ready to listen to that, to accept that. So I won't go much about what he observed. He made the observation of the previous elections, but my observation and my queries and some questions also would be on the present challenge, that the draft constitution provides 40% inclusive inclusion, whereas 60% is for FPTP. We are aware that the FPTP is always taken by the major groups, and he rightly mentioned that 50, they said, for instance, the hill caste will win 54 to 60% of seats. This is based on the previous results. It is not done haphazardly. If we look at the results of the previous election, starting from 91 to 2013, this is the result. And there is no place for the Dalit. There is no place for women. And other, for Janjati also, only the major Janjati groups are able to be elected. So in that context, sometimes with 40% provision for inclusion, how we can make that? He has rightly pointed out that this should be only for the excluded only, not for all the caste and communities. But our draft constitution provides that all the major groups, it has named about 8 groups, including Khas area. So all these will be there, and based on the two Constituent Assembly elections, what we did, in fact, PR in Constituent Assembly was not the inclusive one. It was ethnic quota, a caste quota, based on the proportionate to population. It was not. Later on in the result, it added the values of inclusion. So whether Kåre agree with this, if we look at the PR of CA elections, that was not for the inclusion. That was the division of seats to the communities based on their population ratio. For instance, Madhesi, they got 31 seats. The others in the CA election, which implies hill caste group, Brahmin Kshetri, that they had 30%. That was based on the population. But in totality, in the result, it added values to inclusion. So it was not in the beginning the PR as such inclusive. That was just allocation of seats in proportion to the population. If we call that inclusion, something different. but that added values because of the discrepancies due to FPTP. So this time, how we can add one thing first, that whether the politicians will agree to make it more inclusive, or they keep it only for the allocation of the seats as per population ratio. If that is, then we can't, your suggestion, your formula for the inclusion may not work. This is the real challenge. Another challenge is that even among the ethnic groups who are all well represented through FPTP, they are also not prepared to accept this formula. They also would like to be continued as excluded. They won't accept that they are included. There is the record. If we look at the results, there are some ethnic groups which have been all the time well represented, even in some cases over-represented, right from 1991 to 2013, despite the quota. But there are other groups which have never been able to get elected from the FPTP seats. So once they have got this privilege, they are not ready to give up. This is sometimes the situation, and I remember in many meetings where Kåre himself was also present, that many activists, they listened to his presentation about this JIP list of inclusive JIP list and the inclusion only for those excluded. That now has come to 45%. Yes. Previously, you mentioned that before 2013 election, it was 49% who required inclusion. Now it has come down to 42 or 45? 45. This is very much scientific thing, but politics don't go by science. They have their own way. They are expert to make incompatible, scientifically incompatible things compatible. This is their way. So how we can convince them? Yes, I fully agree with your findings as well as your recommendation. But the challenge is how to convince the politicians, because they have their own interest. They are not prepared to give up their interest. So this may be the serious challenge. Unfortunately, the expected panelist, two politicians, most influential in the drafting. Yes, Khemlalji is here, so we hope that through him, our message can go up to the political level. But unfortunately, at the moment, he is not the member of CA. And formally, it is the CA members who decides our destiny. He can lobby, he can influence, but he is not at the center stage. So there are two questions are there, Kåre, how we can address that. One, again, the challenge that there is apprehension with this 40% inclusion that one, Dalit again will remain underrepresented. They will have hardly very few seats. Hardly two male will be able to be there through the PR list, and rest will be the female Dalits. And among the women also, although draft constitution assures 1/3 representation of women, but the apprehension is that again that seat will be taken by the hill caste women, not again the marginalized communities, women from marginalized communities, including Dalit, will remain unrepresented or underrepresented. How to challenge, how to address that apprehension. Another problem that you see, with the combination of PR and FPTP, we created two categories of our members. One we consider as very much privileged. They themselves call that I am directly elected. One. The PR one is always in the backbench, unless he or she is very much influential within the party. Otherwise, they are always treated as backbenchers. They don't have influential position within the assembly. So how to address these discrepancies created by this mixed system or parallel system to make all the representatives of equal status? That is because I am raising this question because still for the perspective of leadership development, FPTP counts much. A member coming from PR will have minimum space for developing leadership prospect, whereas the FPT provides a lot of grounds. So how to manage that? Unless you make a sort of equal situation, because this is very difficult. Law cannot do this. Only the parties can do this. If parties make rightful a sort of this judicious decision, then in that case we can do that. So how to address that issue? Another problem that you mentioned this the identified groups. Why not to make a cluster instead of yes in the we can also apply the GIP list, but why don't you make a cluster of these smaller groups? A population of a group of population having less than 5,000 population or 10,000 population. If you put them in a cluster, if they are represented in a way that after some interval, at least each group will have some place in the electoral representation. In that case, it may work. Otherwise, out of these 41 Janjati groups and 28 Madhesi groups, which have a population even some groups have population even less than 1,000. Can we ensure their representation in the parliament through this? So how long it will be there? If we go by GIP list, how many years it will take it? How many period of elections? Even within 50 years, it would be difficult to get each group to have at least one time inclusion in the parliament. So this is really challenging because of the public. So my suggestion would be that because of the cultural and the cultural basis, cultural similarity, you can put some of the groups in one block. If either of them is represented, we can think that that group is represented. So that may be one area. Another, I like that this your periodic review and sunset clause, but I doubt whether our politicians will agree on that. You referred India, that sunset clause did not work in India too. So how can these are the realistic political challenge? Yes, with that note, I would like to stop here. Thank you, Kåre.
Thank you, Professor Khanal. I think politics is all about perceptions, and I think perceptions do matter. I think that's a very valid point, especially with regards to the value of the representation. For us, both are representative, but we take them differently, and then I think that's very interesting and valid point. Now, as we don't have anybody in the earlier, the names that we took, Milendra is not here, Lakshman is not here, but I would like to ask Himlalji to be in their place as a politician, active politicians, since Krishnaji is from the academia. So then we'll listen to Muktaji afterwards.
Thank you, Ariji. It is my privilege and honor to be a panelist, single politician. Yeah. But being a politician, the topics is very much mathematicals. By profession, I am a lawyer, and by practice, I am a politician. Dealing with the mathematics is a very hard job for me. It's very, very difficult to me. Even though I will try my best to address, I'll try my best to share some of the thoughts and some of the experience on my own and on behalf of my party and on behalf of one of the political worker also. I'll try my best. Kåre mainly explained about the provision of the draft constitution related with the election, one part. And second part, its complexity. Very, very wisely, he mentioned about it. And Kåre is a Nepal expert. All the time, from the very beginning, at the time of 2006, he has done very good job. Most of the job has been done by Kåre himself, and we were in an interim legislative parliament at that time. We designed the electoral system, mixed electoral system. At that time, it was a initially it was a 50-50, 50% PR and 50% first past the post. And next stage, it was in the original constitution, it was a provision, interim constitution also. And next stage, my party, Maoist party, registered one proposal in a parliament with two proposals. One, declaration of the Republican, and second one is a full PR system, of electoral system it was. Fortunately, the parliament passed the proposal of the full PR. Unfortunately, we negotiated 58% PR and 42% is first past the post. It was still it is in record. Still it is in a very valid and formal record of the parliament, but we couldn't do that way. Second one, I think, when now we are in writing a constitution process. In the background of the constitution writing process is a People's War, People's Movement, and Madhesi Movement, and Janjati movements. All the movements, they have already set out the frame of the constitution. What is the frame of the constitution as a republican, federalism, inclusion, and secularism. These are the four main pillars of the new constitution. And out of four, one is inclusion. This is the issue related with the inclusion. Because of exclusionary state practiced, inclusion became a very particular agenda, political agenda. By some of them were willingly they accepted it, some of them were accepted by compulsion. That's the one complexity. Why PR system is not accepting very easily, and why they are not try to make it very easiest way, why they are trying to creating a much more complexity, a much more complex electoral system. It means, oh, it is much more complex, that's why let's switch on the first past the post. That was also one of the intention it is behind. And third one is my point is, we are in a political agreement we have already done, 16-point agreement, which open up the promulgation of the constitution. We have here political agreement. Political agreement versus technical management is a very crucial and very challenging job. It has been already mentioned about the 40% PR and 60% first past the post, and group extended. Initially, it was only 5 groups were there. These groups were almost, it was defined, and it was mainly intention to include those who were excluded in the past. It was the intention. But now we call the proportional representation system for inclusion. But now I'm not very sure. Is it really for inclusion or sharing of all? It is because khas and area, those people who fought against the ruler, who addressed as a khas and area as a ruler from the very beginning, and excluded people fought against them, and agreement and compromise, somehow it's compromise, and they were expected to address the inclusionary issues, but now it is turned in a sharing the seats in the name of inclusion. That's why I'm very seriously raising these issues. it is needed to redefine of the inclusion, and redefine of the proportional representation system, electoral system is really for the inclusion or really for the sharing. Now the scene has been turned with the sharing rather than the inclusion. This is very another unfortunate things, I think. And I already raised the issues about the inclusion issues. It was a pertinent out of 4. It was a main issues. It is a main issues still, and some of the political leaders, they accept it is willingly. Some of them by compulsion. That's why those who accepted it by compulsion, they are trying to escape, and they are trying to misguide, and they are trying to make it very much complex, and then they wanted to switch again in a first pass, the post-electoral system. Kåre has been already shown 60 years. During the period of 60 years, only one Dalit candidate won in a parliament. Only one single candidate won. But because of the PR electoral system, about 50 plus Dalit candidates, they get the seats. About the women's also, in a 1990 constitution, it was a provision, at least 5% candidates. It was a constitutional provision. And most of the political parties, they gave a 5% candidates, and none of them were elected in a parliament. But interim constitution compelled and mandated 33% representation in a parliament, then it happens. So it is a very legal and constitutional provision is a very important one, but now we are facing some of the problem. And in this scenario, what I would like to share with you, at the time of interim constitution drafting, at that time, some of the provision of the electoral law, it was drafted before the interim constitution. And some of the provision were drafted simultaneously. And if constitutional provision designed by some ways, then what sort of provision, what sort of content would be in a electoral law and rules and procedures, it was worked out simultaneously. That's why at that time we overcome some of the complexities. But this time, this working style is lacking, I think. PR system, percentage of the electoral system, PR and FTPT already divided. And another thing, quotas and groups, it was extended, and which the extended groups are not defined very well. Last time in interim constitution, almost it was defined. We were basically based on statistics bureau records and statistics, and we called them and experts. They said that if we able to answer, these are the Madesi, these are the Adivasi, with logic we asked with them, then they had given a very, very logical point also. That's why we had said that, and we had said these are the groups which are already defined. But this extended groups is very difficult to define. That's why it's create more complexities. So I would like to request with Kåre and with my political leaders also, all the political leaders also, I would like to ask to them, what is your design of the electoral system? What is your plan to mention in a electoral law and procedures, how you can define the candidates of the different groups, how you are planning to choose the candidates, and how you are plan and prepared to declare the winners of the different groups. This is the very, very valid point, and I will take to my leaders, and I will try to convince not only my leaders, all the political leaders, those who sign in a 16-point agreement, those who design in this one. And another very, very complexity is that if agreement is political, drafting constitution is politico-technical, and electoral system is a purely technical. How to make a proper balance, political agreement and constitutional language and technical one. This is the very, very challenging. So I will try my best to arrange and to manage in this way. And finally, my understanding is that complexity created by intention to escape from the inclusion, which will invite more conflict and more problem, not only in a inclusion, but also in a political issues and constitutional writing issues also. I know very well, Kåre has been explained about the complexity of the electoral system and design and extended group. If I pass on this message to the leader without any other manners, then the leaders will say that no. Now we have done whatever we have done. Now you have to manage according to our agreement. This is the mindset of the political leaders. But they are not very much familiar about the technicalities. But finally, technicalities will create some of the problem. And very good things. And my final point will be very good thing is that the scenario of the election, most of the leaders, most of the political parties, and most of the people also, they are very much focused on first past the post electoral system only. We know when it was a counting of the proportional representation system, none of the political party representatives were there. Only the civil servants. They counted the vote, they declared the vote. This much vote you got, they hand over to the political parties. That's why complexity may overcome by this ignorance of the political parties and peoples and leaders. Otherwise, if they are equally focused on first past the post and PR system, it is very complex. It will create a much more difficulties. So in time, we need to design election law and election regulations according to the Constitution in the process of the drafting the Constitution. If this language, this arrangement of the constitutional agreement will not work, then we need to change the agreement also, and we need to manage constitutional, legal, and bylaws provision at a time, I think. This is with this note, I would like to thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Khimlalji. We're still waiting to speakers to turn up, but they are not. So, Muktaji.
Thank you, Rezi. After speaking politician and political scientist, I have little to say actually. And also what I'm going to say is kind of a little bit different and limited as a student of anthropology and as a researcher involved in social inclusion actually. First, I would like to congratulate and also welcome Mr. Vollan for his innovative study, and I really, support his idea that, to end exclusion, including excluded community in the political decision-making body is the key. I think this premise that he has started is really important. we conducted a study recently on inclusion through Department of Sociology and Anthropology at River University. We looked at similar kind of thing, look at inclusion using 6 domains. Look at the social, economic, political, cultural, as well as gender and social solidarity, what we call. And try to index the different groups, caste and ethnic groups in Nepal. The report is available. And there's slight difference in methodology though. For example, when we look at the political, inclusion in political bodies, what we did was not only look at the parliament, but also look at the representation in cabinet, and also representation of the people as officer and above in bureaucracy. So we combine these things and try to see how different caste and ethnic groups are represented. One thing I really liked is that, the excluded groups that Mr. Vollan has identified is identical in a large sense. What our study conducted. The excluded groups who are being identified in this study is also excluded in our study, and also those people who are politically or excluded in the governance is also excluded in social, economic, cultural, gender, and other aspects. So there's a correlation between the exclusion in the political body and other aspects. That's one point that I wanted to make. On the question of list PR system, we have seen a very detailed work that Mr. Vollan has done. But CA election 2 clearly tells us that this is inadequate to make our political body, parliament or CA, inclusive. And his proposal that reservation or quotas for the excluded community that he has identified is really interesting. This is important also because, for example, within Janjati groups, there are groups which has done fairly well in all the elections in the past, despite no inclusionary policies and measures. But there are groups who have failed to send even a single member in the parliament in the past, right? So this is very important for us to see the phenomenon of creamy layer within the group, especially Janjati and Madhesi groups. Dalit as a whole community, they have not represented as proportionate to their population. But one question that I have got is, when we say, jeeping the community or the only providing quotas for the excluded group, in Nepal we are advocating different social movements, and also in the Constituent Assembly people are talking about inclusion in proportionate to their population. So personally I don't see really a contradiction between these things, although the question of whether to put the cost area as a category in there or not. If we follow the principle of in proportionate to population, then perhaps all the communities, including Dalits and the excluded communities today, may get the representation in the political bodies. So I'm not sure if it is a contradictory thing. Of course, when we look at the perspective of merit and competition and the fear of getting the identity rigidified through the election and policies, this may be valid. But in terms of getting to the inclusion representation of different groups in proportionate to their population, seems like perhaps we can work on that as well. This is my question as well, what you think about. Because this is also a kind of a concept that has been going in Nepal for some time, and in Constituent Assembly we can see that people are for and against this. And if you look at the draft constitution more closely, the draft constitution seems to really use only the word inclusion, not in proportionate to population. Because if you only say inclusion, you can bring one Dalit and say, oh look, this is inclusive, you see. So this clause seems like very important. The other point that I have got is on the clustering. Both Mr. Vollan and Professor Khanal has mentioned, since we have got more than 100 groups, and there are so many groups which has a less than 5,000 people. So there's no way that all the groups can get the representation in the parliament. That's practically very valid point. But I have a slight fear. Maybe we can devise some measures. By clustering these small groups into a group, one group, subgroup, then perhaps we will be making this smaller group who are really marginalized and excluded further invisible. So we do not want to be blind to minority questions, and they are actually people who are really at the bottom of our society, who are living in the. So how do we do this? And again, coming to the draft constitution, what I see is the constitution is quite blind at the questions of minority rights. That's my fear. And other point that I've got is one of the clear messages that I draw from the Mr. Vollan's study is that the inclusion should be looked at the to be reflected in the full result of election, not in the candidacy or election, PR or Therefore, my understanding is that if you want to see the inclusion in the full result, then the inclusion only in the PR system is not adequate. We need inclusion, we need a quotas, perhaps also in FPTP, which is lacking, right? So, draft of the constitution again has no provision as such as that. If we could make, in Nepal there's been people advocating, movements advocating that they want a Purna Samanupatik Nirvachan Pranali. That means full proportional. What does that mean? Perhaps if we could make the both system, FPTP and the PR, provide the quotas and reservation for all the groups who are excluded. Perhaps that will bring the result that is inclusive in the outcome. The draft has been analyzed by Professor Hatsetu recently, and he, the composition of the parliament as proposed will be 275, and out of which 110 will be proportional, and then rest will be FPTP. By going by that, he concludes that there will be about 8 male members from among the Janajati in PR system. So the number actually will be reduced. That means many groups who are excluded will be further excluded. From anthropological point of view, looking from the field actually, election is a mechanism which legitimizes the government, right? Unfortunately, when we look at the election practices in Nepal, it is also the place where democratic deficit seems to originate. Especially when we look at the CA election too, we see the use of media, rhetoric, money, and so forth, and you appoint your wives and your spouse, your husbands, your relatives in the PR system, right? So I think when we talk about the election design of the electoral system, perhaps we cannot sort of ignore this way, this issue of what is being practiced in the field, in the country currently. So perhaps this is just a suggestion that perhaps we should also discuss about those issues when we talk about the election issues. The last point on the sunset clause, which Professor Khanal also mentioned, the question that how long affirmative action should be there. This is a perennial question. People in different countries are discussing on this. I agree with Mr. Vollan that the affirmative action should be there until the excluded groups are included. This should, as he has suggested, there should be periodic review. I think the idea, again, coming back to in proportionate to population, seems like very important one here. We can get the references also of this principle from India and South Africa as well. They have applied this principle not only for the parliament but also maybe for other, public entities, bureaucracy, security services, and other things, right? So he also mentioned that perhaps the affirmative action should be there until the time when caste and ethnicity or social backgrounds, social identities are no longer, they no longer operates as the basis for exclusion or inclusion. So I think we can perhaps use this as a way for looking, working on our reviews. But I might add that diversity, because diversity, I mean, maybe more liberal democratic or more modernist point of view, you might be thinking that diversity will one day, disappear. But as an anthropologist, what I believe is diversity is both reality and also an ideal. So instead of thinking about, disappearance of diversity, probably we might need to think about diversity, the situation where diversity can coexist and as equal and mutual respect, and where again the social identities are no longer the basis for exclusion or inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Muktaji. Since the panel discussion is always about the conversation among the panelists also, therefore you have heard the 3 comments on the Mr. Vollan's earlier presentation. So I would like to give briefly chance for Mr. Vollan to say a few words, and then we'll open the floor. You can use the...
Can you change this back to the slides, please? Thank you for those comments. I think they were all very interesting and very relevant. And there's one kind of general comment I'd like to mention, and that is that there is a certain defeatism right now that, well, they are not going to agree with us, so we don't really need to do too much. Krishna, you didn't say that, but you kind of indicated that whatever rationalism or science is coming into it will not be accepted by parties. Maybe. That will be up to the politicians. We have a representative of one party who is, in their ideology, supposed to be scientific in all their decisions. So let's see. Let me mention just, first of all, I didn't mention the women's representation. But you probably know that this doesn't, there is a guarantee for 1/3 women in the parliament, in both houses combined. I am not sure why they combined the houses, but in the National Assembly there will be at least 40% women by design. And maybe the parties have thought, let's put all the women up in the upper house, and then we don't need so many of you in the lower house. And then we can do the politics there by ourselves. I don't know, but it is a little bit strange way of organizing it. But this rule, that you actually look into the full composition of the house and say, if women have fewer than 1/3, they will get 1/3 by adding women from the PR. That's fine. That can be done. That is practical. And it could be done with the other excluded groups as well. I mean, you could have a similar rule, provided that you don't split in 10 or 15 groups, but you have one group of excluded groups, which add up to 45%, and you could have said, okay, if women get 33, 45% could give at least 30%. So excluded groups would, if there were only a quota on PR, they would get 22% or something. No, yeah. But they could be actually guaranteed 30% in the full house with the same mechanism. So this is possible to do. The other thing I just wanted quickly, I will come back to the other questions, but you mentioned clusters, and I fully agree. Of course, you cannot have, every group cannot be in parliament. I mean, you have 120 groups, so it's impossible. But, so you need clusters. And the biggest cluster could be to say, we put all the excluded groups together, Dalits, Muslims, excluded Janjatis, and excluded Madhesi caste, and say they are 45%, and they and parties need to have 45% of those groups, but they can choose which ones. That is the most liberal part. But they could also cluster them at, you need so many Dalits, so many Muslims, so many excluded Jadatis, and so many Madhesi caste. But you couldn't be more detailed than that. This is the maximum of detail, to my mind. But that is possible to do. And then just to this issue of proportionality and inclusion. The problem, the way it is now, is that it is proportional representation of groups within only 40%. So as long as you do that, when you have castes in that group, it will not be proportional in the full house. And again, there is always this balance. What should be up to the parties and to the voters to decide, and what should be there by law? And what is there by law is a very strong mechanism to actually put these need to be protected by law. Therefore, it should be chosen very, very carefully. Thank you.
Can you switch off? Thank you, Kåre, for this. Now the floor is open, and please identify yourself. The volunteers are there with the mic. Please, we'll take first round of question, and let's see how it goes. We need, I think we need to close by 5 o'clock. So we have 20-25 minutes for question answer session. Please be precise, and please identify yourself, and then if you want to address any of the panelists, feel free.
My name is Sohan, and I'm a student and currently for our field work here. Thank you for an excellent lecture, and I would like to see the third alternative also, if that is possible. But then I think I will just briefly go with a comment that Krimlal Devkota sir has made, that the electoral system is the technical system, but is not a political system. Is somewhat misplaced comment, because I mean if you see, because somewhere the India was also came out, and what was Ambedkar and Gandhi was doing in the Pune Pact, that was all the electoral constituency debate was taking place, and after that in the Constituent Assembly. So they didn't left it to the technical committee. They were taking into the political. So I think that probably the scientific part of that is the third alternative was, which the Lama sir has said, that probably in a third alternative, if there could be possible, because we know in a PR system, marginalized group has a tragedy, and then the PR system became a farce now the way it is. So to improve that with keeping the PR system, which is an excellent idea, in the first part of the post system, like in India and other places, where there is a reserved seat for the different constituencies in the place. So if we can do that by making the cluster of the population where there are Dalits and Madhesis, excluded caste are being clustered there, so those seats can be reserved in the first part of the post also, then probably it will be a balanced approach of getting towards social inclusion. So that's a third alternative, maybe, that if you'd like to comment on. Thank you.
We will take a couple of more and then ask the panel to respond to that.
Yes, my name is Girish Kharel. There's one concept I didn't hear you mention to get inclusion, and one that is of compulsory voting. if you have compulsory voting, that would at least include everybody in the voting process. I didn't hear any mention of that. I would like to have your thoughts on that. And the second is, wouldn't it be more intellectually honest to have a voting system based on ethnic voting and gender voting if you wish to see a representation that reflects those views? But we have a system which represents, which is designed to reflect political affiliation, and then you have an expectation that is also representative of other aspects. So if you wish to see ethnic representation and gender representation, it would be intellectually more honest to have a voting system, electoral system, based on gender votes and ethnic votes. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is P.L. Sir, civil servant. I am a very simple citizen. These all these discussions are interesting. You know, what comes to my mind is all these technicalities. There's a lot of technicalities going on in the constitution making, and there is nothing like leadership coming into play in the drafting of these constitutions. Now, a lot is talked about inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. But how really can inclusion be brought about? And together with inclusion, if we want to achieve inclusion, what other fundamental factors affect that achievement? These aspects are not being considered in the whole process. My submission is that inclusion is actually including everybody in the development. But how can that be best achieved? Now, there's talk of identity and then capability for drafting constitutions. I was wondering, actually, if we want to achieve inclusion, two other fundamental factors that we must consider is, now, inclusion, if there is material progress, then participation of all people in that material progress is what we want, what we mean by inclusion. Only if we can create prosperity, then inclusion can be achieved. Now, for inclusion to be achieved, besides this prosperity, we need actually a responsible system of leadership. And designing that kind of thing is not being gone into, as far as I think.
Thank you.
So how actually, besides these detailed technicalities, how can best be inclusion achieved? And for inclusion to be meaningful, what system of government management can produce that prosperity? What material factors have to be considered? And what responsibility, how can a responsibility system be created? Because at the moment, you know, that is what is lacking, leadership, bearing responsibility. We are going in too many technicalities.
Thank you, sir.
Not addressing the core, I think.
Anybody else on the... I saw the hand being raised there. Please identify yourself, and then if you have any particular preference.
Hi, my name is Arun Parazuri. I'm a student.
Louder.
Sorry, my name is Arun Parazuri, and I'm a student. My question was basically, it seems like a lot of the debate here equates the concepts of caste or ethnicity and class. And I was wondering why, in a country that's seemingly so dominated by parties that at least profess leftist ideologies, there doesn't seem to be as much of a constitutional mandate for inclusion on a class basis. And I was wondering if especially Mr. Devkota could respond to that with reference to the electoral process.
Thank you. What's going on there? Because there was no, okay, you go to the end. So, Himlalji, please.
Thank you for your questions. Questions are very much valuable. I don't know if I'm competent to answer you or not, but I'm trying. What I mean about the technicalities of the electoral system, agreement, political agreement is a more political. Constitution drafting is a politico-legal and politico-technical. Politics come technical, and designing electoral system is a more technical. This is my mean. When we talk about the election, it is a politics, no doubt. Beyond the politics, electoral system, election is we can't talk about it. But just I mean, designing electoral system is based on political agreement. Its objective is to achieve the political goal, no doubt. But designing electoral system is a technical one. Just this is my mean. I think others. Inclusion is okay. Inclusion, everybody is included. It's okay. It's fine. And this is also one of the versions comes up. But Nepal was ruled by differently. One section was a ruler, and majority of the ruled one. And there is a oppressed class, caste, groups and regions also. If we talk about the equal for all, without any special affirmative action to those who lag behind 200 years, hundreds of years. That's why we are talking about the inclusion, those who are underrepresented and oppressed and suppressed, and that's why we are talking about the ethnicities also. Ethnicities, it was also oppressed ethnicities. That's why we need to empower them first. Then we can talk about the competition and something like that. Thank you.
I have very brief remarks on what some of the points raised from the floor. About this, yes, I agree with Khimlalji that election is designing election is technical. Yes, but you see, we can see in this way. For a voter, it is very simple. You go to the polling booth and you vote, and the converting your vote to result is real. Sometimes it is technical, depending on the electoral system. Now, about the inclusion, I would like to share with you. You see, democracy is by us. It's a government of the people. Is not possible. Everyone cannot be included in the government. That is why we go for election. We have representation. Democracy is government by the representatives. So everybody has right to be represented. Inclusion matters in that line. Is not politics is not to be elected is not to be a meritorious. It is just the will of the people, desire of the people. Whoever people who like to give their vote, he or she is elected and representative. It doesn't mean that he or she is the best qualified person in the country. It's just a means of representation. So inclusion matters in that way. For instance, in any elected assembly, people would like to see their face and figure. If there is something lacking, then it can't be represented. So the representation and inclusion goes simultaneously. You cannot separate that. Whatever means we have to follow. whether it is PR, whether reservation, that one. Another about reservation that you see, in Nepal, what I feel that reservation for the FPTP seat is feasible only for the two communities, for Dalit and for women, not for all other excluded groups. That would be, there will be too many reserved seats. If we have more than 50% reserved seat, then there is no meaning of reservation. If it is limited to 30 seats, 20 seats, 25 seats, then it matters. So in that context, what I feel, yes, we can ask for the politicians to consider on that, to have some reserved seats for the Dalit and women, or to make this FPTP candidacy also inclusive, not only for not sort of free for all. So there must be some provision for Dalit, for women. Yes, there is one provision that in the present this CA election, at least 1/3 of the candidacy should be women. That was binding for the party. In candidacy also, in candidates also, for both PR and FPTP, including all, including FPTP, there is a provision that the candidate should be at least 30%. The result is 30%. That is the political declaration. Thank you.
Could you turn this back again? I don't want my picture. Can you, excuse me, can you turn this back to the presentation, please? Can you turn it to the presentation? Good, thank you. Now I'm all set. Back to Krishna's first comments. And you are right when you say that with the current description in the draft, it is not inclusive, it is proportional. It is dividing the groups according to the population. And that's the whole point. I mean, this is actually when people are giving comments to the draft. So to make it inclusive, it needs to change that language. It's as simple as that. And then you say, and I think you are right, nobody wants to give up their status as excluded. I think that's a very, very good point. And we have had this discussion with many groups, because I do agree with you that with Mukhtar, that there is a correlation between economic and political exclusion, but it's not 100%. So in a way, when Yadavs, for example, have always been elected to parliament, they haven't been necessarily elected to government and they haven't become generals in the army, they have been excluded in other ways. And because of that, they really feel excluded. So when you try to say, but in terms of election to parliament, you are actually not excluded. Yes, we are excluded. And you get into that kind of discussion. And then the science, whether the scientific view will then prevail, we don't know, Krishna. That I know. But at least to kind of agree to some criteria is probably very important. And will all the women be from Hill caste? And if you look at this slide, the purpose of this is actually to show that a Dalit woman is worth a lot to a party with a Bahun leader, because she will hit two birds with one stone and open up for the Bahuns to actually then male Bahuns to be on the list. So the incentives are actually opposite. The incentives would be to have excluded women and not included women. So I think the long-term incentive here is at least there. the two categories is also of MPs, first past the post and those elected by PR. I think that will be much better if they go for really closed lists. In countries where you have only list PR and closed lists, where people know who they are voting for, they know that the seats will be filled from top of the list. Nobody would even think of that they are not directly elected. Everybody are directly elected. We know who we are voting for, and these are the ones who are elected. So these two categories will not be the same if they stop selecting after the elections. Because with the selection afterwards, obviously I am accountable to the party leader who selected me. But if the list is clear before the elections, it is a different situation. Then there was also some questions about what about quotas on first past the post, like in India. First of all, it's easier to implement in PR. And it is possible, if, as I said, women are not given proportional share of the full house. Women are given 1/3, but they are 50%. So they are getting 2/3 of their fair share. You could do something similar with excluded groups. Excluded groups are 45%, so they could be given 30% guaranteed. But you pick them from the PR side, and it is possible to do that. Whether one should and therefore there will be incentives for parties to have women and excluded on safe constituencies without reserved seats, because they do want to open up in the PR for their leaders. They don't want the PR to be used only as compensation for excluded groups. So I think there are, in the long run, not necessarily in the first election, but when they get used to how it works, they will try to put more women in first past the post. Whether or not it is a good idea to have reserved seats, that in a way it's a very political issue. I'm not going to say yes or no to that, but just remember, when you have, and this is how it works in India, that I know, if you have a constituency where all the candidates have to be Dalits, they still come from the mainstream parties. Dalits do not have majority in the constituency. They are still a small group. So the candidates are totally dependent on the upper caste votes. And therefore, their policies need to be mainstream. They cannot fight for a Dalit agenda and think they will be elected by the Brahmins and Katya and so on. So there are some dynamics in that as well. Whereas in PR, if you have a Dalit on the list, it is to show diversity. And it is to get the Dalit vote. I mean, if you have reserved seats in first past the post, you don't need the Dalit votes to be elected. But if you have it on a list, you really want to have a Dalit who Dalits want to vote for, because then we get more votes, and more votes translate into more seats in PR, as opposed to in first past the post, where it's good enough to be biggest. So there are different dynamics here. I'll just point that out. But if the politicians should now agree to, in addition to what they have now, also have reserved seats, that's fine. Compulsory voting, totally political issue. There are 2 countries where they are enforcing that. Other countries don't prefer that. But there was a comment saying that if the electoral system is actually designed for a competition between political parties, and that's it. And then if you want actually representation by people and gender, you should have gender votes or ethnic votes, if I understood you correctly. I do agree that it's primarily a matter of political choice, but you can think about more than one dimension at the same time. And if we all agree that the political dimension is the most important, you add on with also diversity in gender and groups, and you can do that. You don't need to divide if that was what you suggested, maybe it wasn't, but that women should vote for women and Dalits for Dalits or whatever. I think that would be far too divisive. How to create meaningful inclusion? I think you touched upon it. I think when it comes to these kind of issues, unless the elite, political elite, I'm not talking about caste, political elite, actually want it, you won't get it, regardless of technicalities. I think you are quite right in that, but you need the technicalities at all as well. But I have been studying peace agreements and power sharing agreements, and in a way, if you just take what they have had in Netherlands or Germany or Switzerland and put it into a post-conflict country in Africa, it wouldn't necessarily work, because there isn't this commitment of the political elite to make it work, and it becomes a formality. So there are many issues here, and I'm very careful on behalf of elections. I don't think electoral systems solve every problem in the country and in the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any expertise or competencies to dwell on the matter which was discussed today. In a sense that I know as a citizen of this country, elections do matter to us. Democracy do matter. But while listening to discussion, something came to my mind. That's very difficult to balance between number and the voice. A single person can have a voice, but number do matter. In election, number do matter. At the same time, challenge is to how to include the minority voice in that picture. So it's a very, so it becomes little, not technical, but to me, election is a basically extension of the enshrining the normative value of a democracy, equality, justice, representation. So therefore, it may sound technical, but how to realize the dream of democracy, which is equality, justice, into practice. I think in that sense, this discussion is a very important, and I hope it will contribute to the larger public discussion in and around Constitution. And I would like, on behalf of the Social Science Baha, I would like to thank the lead presenter today, Kåre Vollan, and the panelists, Professor Krishna Kanal, Dr. Mukta Singh Lama Tamang, and Khimlal Devkota, the former CA member. And we are very sorry to miss two of our prominent speakers, since they had to be in a parliament, and a politician and a minister. One has to go after governmental duty. The parliament is very important for them. So we'll have another opportunity to interact with them. With these words, I would like to invite you for a tea and coffee and informal conversation, because 1.5 hours or 2 hours is not enough. If you like to have personal conversation with the panelist and the presenter today, so you are welcome. So on behalf of the Social Science Baha, again, we are very encouraged by your presence here, your attendance. You have always encouraged us. So I would like to thank you again. We'll meet in the next program. Thank you very much.